Hi everyone, and welcome to the Great Comms Debate 8, the Turnover Tsunami edition. We decided to host a special edition today because of, what's happening around us. People are changing jobs faster than ever. And in preparation for this debate, I came across a statistics saying that in the USA, around 50% of employees are aiming to change their jobs this year in 2021. So let's see what we as IC people can do about it, why we think this is happening, and how to address it in our companies. And to help us figure this out, I invited these three wonderful ladies to join me today and help us figure out the answers to the many questions that arise nowadays. So before we go to the speaker introductions, I would like to ask everyone in the audience to kindly use the chat box on the right-hand side and comment where you're tuning in from. It's always very interesting to see where people are calling in from and what kind of spread we have on the audience, where everyone is from. Minna, would you like to start? Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and also where you are tuning in from?
Hello, and greetings from rainy Helsinki here from Finland. My name is Minna Pinola. I head the communications for Solita, which is a technology company here, and we operate in 6 countries: Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Belgium, Germany, Estonia. And with a crew of 1,200 people currently and fast growth, it's been interesting to debate about this issue. In Finland, I'm also in charge of marketing, so I look at this issue from 2 sides of the story.
Looking forward to hearing your insights. Advita, how about you? Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I am from Manchester in England, which is equally as rainy as Minna's place where she is right now. And I think we're quite known for our weather up in the north. I own an internal communications and employee experience consultancy called CommsRebel, and I'm also the co-founder of A Leader Like Me, which is a membership aimed at underrepresented women of colour who want to progress further in their careers as well. And I'm really this is my second comms debate. I think I was the first host on the last one in January 2020, so I'm looking forward to chatting with Stephanie and Minna today.
Yes. We're happy to have you back with us. You did a great job with the previous Great Comms debate. So let's have Advita again. Okay, Stephanie, could you kindly tell us about yourself?
Yes, hello, I'm Stephanie. I work at Mount Sinai Health System as the Director of Internal Communications. So we're a health system with 8 hospitals in New York City, which is where I'm tuning in from. And I'm excited about the debate. I've attended a few of these, and it's always a lively conversation. So I look forward to learning from everyone.
Yes, thank you. And I'm Anita. I'm Content Marketing Manager at Smart. I'm going to be your host today. And Smart is an employee communications and advocacy platform. We help our customers to reach their audience with targeted communications. But that's enough about us. I'm actually super excited to see the comments in the chat. There's people from all over the world: Atlanta, Belgium, India, Armenia. I think I've never seen Armenia in the chat, so thank you for joining. And yeah, it's very nice to see that people from all over the world took their time to join us today. So let's go to the debate guidelines. So 6 statements are going to be proposed, and all of them relate to the internal communications and employee turnover and how to address it from communications perspective. The speakers will have to agree or disagree with the statements and also explain their position. And the floor will be open for roughly 5 to 10 minutes for our speakers to discuss. Also, we'd like to encourage you to post on LinkedIn and Twitter with a hashtag #GreatCommsDebate during the session. And our marketing manager, Ankur, is happy to engage with you there and help us spread the word about the debate. So let's go to the first statement. This is a very strong one, so I'm curious to see what you have to say about it. People leave because of bad internal communications. Minna, would you like to open the floor for us?
Sure, why not? Naturally, it would be great to find a scapegoat for all this. And of course, we could point our fingers at the internal comms, but I do disagree with this one, and especially, for example, in IT industry where I come from, it's not really about even being unsatisfied currently, but it's the employees market. You get very exciting opportunities, for example, as an entrepreneur, or there might be a well-funded startup that is looking for personnel and is sort of desperate. So people have very many kinds of stories, and of course it would be an over-exaggeration, I think, to say that the internal comms is only the factor that affects that. But however, how a company communicates, it's of course a big part of the company culture, and it's sort of manifestation of the leadership and culture. And in that aspect, it could be that people feel that it's one of the factors. And perhaps from that aspect, I encourage everybody to do good leaver interviews. We always do with every individual who decides to leave. We do a proper interview done by an outsider, not her team or their team lead or somebody close to them, but somebody who is objective in their views. So then we can learn whether it's the internal comms or whether it's something else, or was it just too good an opportunity to pass. Then we will learn that as well. And also not to be too bleak about it. We actually have had, during the COVID years, we have had several people coming in back after being for a while in another company. So sometimes it might have a good ending anyway. And so it's also good to keep in touch with the people who are outside your circle of trust.
Yes, it can be sometimes hard to be supportive of your colleagues leaving, but we should do that because they might.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Stephanie, how do you feel about?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Minna said. I think I don't think, first of all, I don't think a lot of people know what internal comms is, right? So I don't think anyone's going to say, I left my company because I didn't have good internal comms, you know. But as we know, those of us who are practitioners of internal comms, we are really involved in a lot of other things that could cause people to leave, whether that is a culture that is not inclusive, or, you know, work-life balance, or just, you know, barriers to work. So I think, you know, bad, as we're calling it, internal comms, could contribute to some of those things, and those reasons people leave could be made better by good internal communications. The one area where I'm almost leaning to agreeing with the statement is just about purpose and connection to work. I think internal comms has a vital role to play in that. And, you know, one of the surveys and the many articles out there said that, you know, 46% of people after the pandemic don't feel as connected to their work. And I think that internal comms has a lot to offer there, along with branding and leadership and vision and all of those things. But we're really the ones who help people feel that that sense of purpose and understand where their work fits into the greater picture. So so when you look at it that way, I would almost say agree, but overall, I think internal comms is not the main reason people are leaving organizations.
Okay, thank you. Actually, talking about being connected, I realized that during talking about guidelines, I forgot to mention that we strongly encourage everyone in the audience to ask questions from the speakers. And we normally have time for questions at the end, but it's much better if you ask them as we go, so we can pick them up while we are still discussing a particular statement, and it's going to be relevant and timely. So please don't be shy, ask, comment, make jokes. We are excited to be connected to the audience. That's why we're here, for our audience to enjoy the show. Okay, now, last but not least, Advita, how do you feel about this statement?
I'm going to agree with this statement. I do think people leave organizations because of bad internal comms, and, you know, bear with me before people shoot me down. As an internal communicator, we have an umbrella view of an organization, and it's our responsibility, in a way, as Stephanie quite rightly said, you know, our role is to make sure that our colleagues are connected, understand the purpose and the values, and ultimately what they're there to do and help them thrive in the business as well. And I think often as internal comms, we can get stuck into the tactics of things, and we look at the quantity of things we're sending out, and rather than looking at the quality and the work that we're doing to support leadership and colleagues across the business in terms of the comms that they are doing and sharing as well. And a part of this is down to the fact that I think some organisations, as Stephanie quite rightly said, don't know what internal comms is actually there to do. A lot of people mistake our role as making things look really good, or prettifying presentations, or helping out with events and those kind of tactical, practical things, which I understand is part of some people's roles, but we do have a bigger role to play in the organisations that we work in. And I think COVID and the pandemic has demonstrated the value of internal comms and the difference we can make in organisations. The external, if you looked at the news that came out during the COVID times and pandemic of organisations that failed miserably with their colleagues, and the kind of cancel culture that was out there, it was definitely down to the fact that there was not real internal communication in the business, and people didn't really put any more time or resource or budget behind it. And the organisations that thrived and did really well and people felt connected, even during times of crisis, were the ones where internal comms was invested. And a range of, I'm talking about a spectrum of internal comms, from the newsletters that you send out to the advice that you give to your leadership team. We do have quite a significant part to play in that, and we are, privileged at some of the positions that we hold in these organisations. So we do get the feel of the floor and colleagues from across the different levels and grades. So we should embrace that. So I do think people do leave organisations because of bad internal comms, and we can have a part to play, like I said, in improving that.
It's a very interesting point. I think as a kind of employee, you tend to think about internal communications as people sending news, but it's also people advising the leadership, and that's a big part of why people might believe in. But we actually have a nice question in the chat from Monica. What are some ways you're working to build connections with remote or hybrid workforce? So I think it's related to us talking about being connected, or on the opposite, feeling disconnected. So do you have any advice here? I know it's a very complex question, but if we could summarize it a little bit.
I think the biggest piece of advice I can give is that you have to be really intentional, and you have to be quite focused in what outcomes you want to achieve from the connections you're making with this workforce. So things that we took for granted, such as the water cooler conversations, or people having those ad hoc conversations in the staff areas, or kitchens when they were making a drink, those things have gone with hybrid. So you have to be quite intentional in making sure that those side conversations and things that build culture and connection are still in place. So for a couple of examples I'll share with you, one organisation specifically has a day that they all colleagues come into the workplace. So the people work hybrid, but they've decided that on the Wednesday morning between 10 and 12 is when the entire team will be in, and they'll have the catch-ups and the informal chats and all that kind of stuff. And then other organisations have brought in a colleague app to kind of the very tactical and practical example is a colleague app where they can have on the moment and finger on the pulse kind of feedback, so people don't feel disconnected. And that's when engagement kind of slips, is when people feel disconnected from what's going on in the businesses. And the third point, sorry, before I finish, is that leadership also need to understand that they don't have bias when they are talking to people in the room that are with them. So as a leader, you need to make sure that you are still you're having the same opportunities are given to those folks who might be working from a different location. And just to check in with that, because it's really easy to kind of allocate work to people that are visible in front of you and not think too much about the folks who you can't see. So as a leader or as a manager of a department, it's important that the plans and processes are in place to make sure that they don't have any kind of bias towards people that they are visible in front of them.
Okay. Thank you.
Pointers. I'd perhaps add, we have, of course, the stuff varies from very small things to bigger things, and from leadership communications to individuals. For example, in our team, we have remote coffees, and And we have also made walking meetings so that people go to work and everybody's remote. And then, of course, we have newsletters for the whole house. So depending on, for example, Finland people and Swedish people and so on. We have made video interviews of other Solitans when we weren't able to meet live, and have virtual town halls and virtual events with some sort of, for example, Christmas party stuff and also more relaxed stuff, not only the official news. And also one thing that we've really put effort to is onboarding new Solitans and new employees. We have a lot of content in our e-learning environment, and also have dedicated several days for the people to meet even remotely the most important people that they are going to be needing. And program is done for everybody when they come and arrive.
Thank you very much. I think we need to move on to the next statement. We have a lot of wonderful questions in the chat, but I'm going to try to pick them up a bit later. We still have 5 statements to go through. So statement number 2 says, employees judge their organization, but what they hear on the inside, not what they hear externally. Stephanie, this was the statement submitted by you. So do you agree or disagree?
So I disagree. I would basically rephrase this one. I would say employees judge their organization by what they hear on the inside and what they hear externally, right? Because we're all living our lives outside of work as well. We're seeing the ads that our organizations put out. We're seeing what is said on social media about our organization. And when the external and the internal don't align, that can be really disorienting. And, you know, there's that transparency, I mean, I think sometimes, it could be about advertising. It could be about a scandal, right? I haven't had to deal with that, right? But if there's something going on in the outside world and it's not even being addressed internally, that is really going to cause a lot of disruption in an employee population. So I think it's all about alignment of both of those teams and how you're representing yourself, not only to your customers, but your employees, even when they're out in their everyday lives.
Yeah, and that's the part that's difficult to control. What people say in the outer world, but that's the challenge.
That is.
Advita, what do you think about that?
No, I do. Yeah, I agree with the statement. I think people do judge their organizations by what they hear on the inside. The number of conversations I'm sure the folks who are listening would relate is, colleagues see one version of the organization externally through PR and publicity, and then it's not being reflected on the inside very well at all. So they judge, rightly so, because what the organization is saying externally is often quite performative potentially, or has been glossed over with some of the internal stuff that's going on, and it doesn't align to Stephanie's point in what they see and hear compared to behaviors in the business. So definitely I do think employees judge organizations by what they say on the inside, which is why we have to be so careful and so measured and connected with our external comms colleagues to making sure that messages are aligned, and we guide and advise our leaders in the right way in terms of, is it true what they're saying, and also does it, where does it sit on the ethics kind of on the ethics scale as well. If they're saying they're doing one thing externally to bring on new talent, but internally that's not the case, and eventually they will be called out for that, and employees will judge based on what they hear and see inside as well.
Thank you. Minna, what about you? Do you agree or disagree?
Yes, I also agree, and both of you had good points there, and it's totally going to be a problem if the internal and external brand don't match for some reason. But it's also a matter of order. When you hear things, it's going to be a disappointment for, at least in our company, if people hear stuff externally before they've heard it internally. So as we are not a listed company or anything like that, so we it's a very important principle for us to always keep our own people first informed, and then only make sure that we get to them first before we go to social media or any place else. And I would say that it can even be a good thing, a good piece of news if you share it externally first. It may lead to the people feeling that they are not insiders, or they are not being trusted, or something like that, in case they didn't hear about it first. So we try to prioritize our own people, make them feel like VIPs in that sense.
And we already briefly touched on how going to remote work changed the way we talk. We don't have a cooler to talk next, not the coffee break. So Amber has a question about this. Do you think the pandemic has been advantageous in highlighting the importance and value of internal communication? So, like, do you think people understood during the pandemic how big overall IC plays, or still not enough?
I think the gaps have been highlighted, and so a lot of people are starting to ask questions. It may take us a while to really understand how to use internal comms effectively, right? It's as we, Advita and others said before, there's a lot of misunderstanding about, are we just the internal like promotions team, or are we the event runners and things like that? But when we're really able to help advise on the strategy and think about our employees and what actions we want them to take and how we want them to feel, once we get to that point, I think that'll be great. So I think it's highlighted the gap and the importance, and we're still working to find our way there.
Definitely. I think this is the reason why I always kind of talk about making sure that you demonstrate your value add. And those internal comms teams that have demonstrated their value add have been taken more seriously, I would say, during the pandemic, because the leadership team have recognized actually these are the contributions the internal comms team are making to the success of our kind of bottom line. And regardless whether you work for a not-for-profit, a charity, or a business that turns over money in that way, everybody's concerned about the bottom line and making sure that we're addressing those kind of key questions that leaders have for us. So if, as an internal comms function, as an internal communicator, if you can try and link and demonstrate the contributions you're making to that bottom line in terms of return on investment and some of the campaigns you're running, then that will, definitely demonstrate your value, rather than looking at outputs and the quantity and the quality, of the stuff you're sending out, rather than the quality of stuff you're sending out.
Talking about communication with leadership and communicating the importance of IC, Mukti had an interesting question: 3 tips on making a leader who is publicly shy to come out and connect with people. I was wondering maybe if each of you can give a tip. We can have 3 tips combined.
I can hear somebody talking behind. I don't know whose microphone is it, but sometimes you get some noise.
Yes, I can also hear it.
If it's possible to. Yeah.
Yes. Did you hear my question, or would you like me to repeat?
I'll give a tip. I think one thing I've learned being in healthcare and being like in a hospital and things like that is a good way to get people started is just to get them to be with employees who are frontline employees and not necessarily on the executive team or in leadership, and to just start having those conversations, whether that is on the front line, in a unit in a hospital, or whether that's through Zoom for other organizations. I think it doesn't have to be like on camera to start. You could just start with having simple conversations and connecting them with people outside of their network that they usually don't speak with, and really start with the comfort level there.
Yeah, I know in some organizations they even have this kind of roulette where you get to have a 15-minute chat with a random person every day, just to get to know. Now when you work remotely, just to get to know your colleagues. It sounds like a very good idea of keeping people connected. Minna, Advita, do you have any tips?
I was just going to say, it's definitely important to find what, similar to Stephanie's point, is find what works for them. As leaders, not everybody is, wants to be on stage, and not everyone's good either. You need to recognize where their strengths lie. And as a communicator, try and get to know that leader, and have one of the best things I ever did in my career is take a leader out for a coffee or try and request a 10-minute chat with them just to kind of find out what their kind of do's and don'ts are, and try and discover what's comfortable for them and what isn't comfortable for them. And slowly, you know, it will be about building confidence in them, in what they want to do. And some leaders prefer, like Stephanie said, the smaller group sessions rather than being on stage in front of hundreds of colleagues. And others prefer being on stage in front of hundreds of colleagues and not in a smaller group. It's just trying to find out what works for them and not to force them into something that they're uncomfortable doing, because that will just completely turn them off and they won't engage with anything that you're trying to do in the business.
Yes, and we live in a peer-to-peer society, so we have like an endless opportunity of communicators in the company. I feel that it's like not always even the leadership that needs to be the one conveying the message. It can be your colleague or a team that is somehow being great at something that they are doing or something. So that might be received even better. So, yeah, for me, like to the earlier question, in Solita, I feel that people really, how do you call it, value internal communications. But of course, that's a different thing that they don't perhaps see the stuff that the internal communications team does to keep that open culture. But as a matter of COVID, it was really a good time in that sense, even though it was sort of crisis comms in the beginning, but it was still a nice way to get a management attention. We had an everyday meeting with our CEO at that point when we started in the end of February. So at that time, I had his attention whenever I wanted.
It was easy to communicate the importance of internal communication.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And of course, it's a joint agenda. And I think it's really important to make everybody feel that we are doing it together. Yeah. And it always starts with listening. Yeah.
Thank you. Before we move to the next statement, there is one question in the chat I just can't skip. Are you using any kind of software that are helping to check the internal comms and also which provides a visibility? So as you know, I'm from Smart. Goharik, I don't know. Goharik, I'm sure, I swear I don't know the person, but somebody asked, so I have to have a small product placement moment. Smart provides you great visibility in how internal communications is performing. We have top of the class analytics, which is a national market, so please look into Smart. Okay, let's go to the next statement. Company culture is the responsibility of HR. Sorry, losing my voice. Advita, what do you have to say about this statement? I know this is a very controversial one, which probably raised a lot of eyebrows in our audience, blaming everything on HR. What would you say here?
This is a controversial one, because I do think that at HR do have an element of responsibility for company culture, because they can influence some of the decisions that have been made in the business, and often you find that HR directors are the ones who have the seat at that table in the boardroom. So I do feel that they're not 100% responsible for company culture. That is down to everybody in the business, particularly the leadership team, but they can definitely influence the culture by making sure that they are supporting and giving the feedback that they need to give to that leadership team, because they do have that visibility with those boardroom executives more often than communicators do anyway. So I do think the company culture, to an element, is a responsibility, or play a big part, I should say, or influence in that, in making sure that the culture is fit for purpose and it's doing what it needs to do. Gets rid of the toxic thoughts.
What about Minna and Stephanie? Stephanie, what do you think?
Yeah.
I disagree with this statement. I think a really good, very recent thing we can point to that illustrates that culture can't really live in one place is all of the work around equity and diversity and all of that, right? So, you know, having an office for diversity, equity, and inclusion is not new, but we know it wasn't working. It wasn't, you know, we can't hire people and say, yeah, we hire diverse people, go over to that office. That's not building a good, a good culture. So culture is about environment. And I think that it cannot live in a department. It has to be all leaders, all managers, anyone who's responsible for an environment or for a team has to lead that culture. And then IC can support that, HR can support that, provide the resources for it, but it has to be everyone.
Yeah, I agree. And I think internal comms is a real crucial ally to HR here. And whether it's new initiatives or the company values or whatever, we are the ones sort of helping to translate it and to make sure that it reaches its target audiences. And there's building a company culture. It never happens by accident. So you need to have a common ground there with the different units of the company. And I think values is a good thing, like thinking about the company culture based on the company values. It would lead to nothing if only HR knew what the company values are. So we need everybody on board and to build their work that we do, even if it's marketing. I mean, as I often talk about marketing and communications to our people, then I always say that if they feel that our marketing is not in line with our values, then I want to hear it, because I think company culture should and the values that it represents need to go to all sectors of the company to be true.
Yeah,
I do agree. Sorry, Anita, I was going to say, I do agree that, everybody has a responsibility for culture, definitely. You can't exist if it's only one person, but I do believe that there needs to be a driver, there needs to be someone who drives it and gives advice and guidance, and can influence the right way, because the reason the things like D&I don't work very well and you have one dedicated officer to D&I is because often what you find, and I am generalizing here, so please excuse me, but in my experience, the D&I officer is very tactical with their deliverables. So they'll do awareness month, with Black History Month is right now, so they'll do something around Black History Month, they'll do a Diwali celebration, they'll do Eid, but they don't think about the actual impact on the strategy, and they don't have that influence at the senior leadership team to make that change happen. So even though D&I belongs to belongs to everybody has a responsibility in the business to embrace inclusivity and belonging and make a difference. It has to be directed and led by somebody to give people that safe environment to be able to converse and know which direction the business is heading in. Otherwise, you end up working in silos. People create their own mini subcultures, and you find that in some organizations that if you work for this manager in this team, you have a better experience than if you work for this manager in this team. And that really, there should be some sort of consistency in order to kind of bring people together, and that has to be led by somebody. And I often think that that experience does sit within the kind of people environment with the chief people officer in HR, because they like internal comms to have an umbrella view once again of the business.
Yeah, to me it looks like the challenge lies to know, is it really communicated through like managers within the teams, because you can't really, the problem when you work in an enterprise companies, it's very difficult to control what's happening in every particular team, and HR department or IC department is only this many people, so you can't really be present in most of the meetings or in the kind of discussions with a smaller group. So I guess it comes down to the role of IC in supporting leaders and making sure they communicate the values properly and they support the company values. Yes. But in the interest of time, I guess we need to move to the next statement. And it reads, there is nothing internal comms can do to prevent the turnover tsunami. Minna, what would you like to say about it? Do you agree or disagree?
Well, naturally, I will disagree, as I have a lot of faith in the communications people, and I really do believe that we can help companies to succeed. I would point out that it again comes back to the company culture. I think we are one of the glue factors that make people stick to the company. We can help people maintain trust in the way that they communicate. and also to get excited in the way we help people present stuff, and so that they understand their audience's wishes also. So it's like the people, we need to know the facts and do surveys so that we understand if we are not aware of something. And of course, it's also about leadership communications and strategy communications, maintaining the purpose of people that they feel that the company is doing, and being part of it, and making sure that we have an internal flow of information, like whether it's Slack or intranet or newsletters, to make them feel part of the team. And of course, we can do all sorts of stuff, but also one thing that we are at our best is the coaching stuff to make people be one unified front to maintain the trust and build the trust in the company.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to what Stephanie brought up in the beginning about feeling connected, and helping people feel like one team. Stephanie, do you have anything to add? Like, what do you agree or disagree with the statement?
I disagree with the statement, and I agree with a lot of what Minna said. I think, we've already talked a lot about culture and connection and purpose in a company. I also think internal comms has a more even foundational contribution, where we're providing information people need to just do their jobs, and channels that are functional where they can find what they need on a given day, and there aren't those barriers. So there's a lot we can do to prevent that burnout or that dissatisfaction with employees, with some very basic things, feedback loops, and making sure those are available and out there for people. We can't do it alone, as we've said, in some of the other statements, but I do think there's a lot we can do to prevent burnout. To prevent the turnover tsunami.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Advita, what about you? Do you agree or disagree?
I'm in the middle with this one, because I do think there's, I completely agree with Minna and Stephanie. I think there's a lot that we can contribute to make sure that people feel connected and belong and feel included in the conversations. But I think the pandemic has also demonstrated that a lot of people have reflected and realized, what's important to them and what isn't important to them anymore. And, there is certain elements of this, people have made a decision whether that culture is for them or not, and they've realized that they're going to be happier elsewhere. Then I do think it's harder for us to kind of, control that turnover tsunami. There's a big psychological study around people's priorities that have changed recently. And organizations have changed, right, in terms of their priorities. So I always think that if the culture isn't right, and the things have changed direction and people are not comfortable with it, no matter what has been offered to them, because, as human beings, we have different priorities and we change, we can move on. I don't think a company should be clinging on to people who don't want to be there, despite everything that they've done. The culture is not broken and everything's good. I don't think you should try and cling on to those folks who want to go, because it will just breed a bit more, it'll breed poor behavior in times and stuff like that. So I think we do need to be careful about that at times, and just be conscious about whether it is they made the decision because it's best for them and what's going on in their lives and they have to go because of that, or are they going because of the toxic culture and the behaviors of the business. If it's that, we can work with them and try and fix it before they go. But if it's because they made a personal decision due to whatever's going on in their life, and they had an epiphany and they want to go, then I do think it's dangerous to cling on to those folks, because eventually it could turn a bit toxic and poor behaviours could come out, sadly, on that. So we just have to be a bit careful on how we manage that turnover tsunami in those businesses.
Of course, there are a number of reasons people might leave, so not everyone is meant to stay in the same place forever. I guess we all realize that, and we all probably change jobs in our lives. Actually,
and it's how we manage. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Nisa. I was just going to say how we manage that exit, right? And I think it was Minna earlier who said that we have to be quite graceful in terms of people are going, then let's find out why. Let's have a conversation with them. Let's not burn bridges. Let's make sure they have the just as good experience of when they enter to when they leave. Because, like you said, people come, people talk about organizations, people can share their experience is quite widely now on platforms that have been created. You know, nobody needs to be approached by a newspaper anymore. You've got your own platform through socials that can do that. So let's work with colleagues in terms of let's give them a good experience when they leave as well as when they enter. I think that's what that can pay back in dividends as well.
I also really like what Minna said in the beginning about having external people having these exit interviews, because that's, I think, where the problem often lies, is that you don't really want to say to your employer everything that was wrong, even when leaving, unfortunately. That's what I experienced and what my friends have. So I think it's always great to have an external agency do it and have it anonymous. Before we close the statement, Suzanne has asked an interesting question about feeling connected. Do you have any tips to improve and encourage employee voice? Communications is a two-way process, but hybrid working staff might be less inclined to speak up. So
we use a tool called Peacon. I don't know if somebody here also uses it, but I really like that tool. It's we do like a twice a month survey, and it poses different questions to different people, and so it's ongoing all the time. And all the teams have their own view for the team results. So then it also the manager or the team lead can sort of mark that he or she has read the comments or can answer those, even anonymous comments and so on. So it's one way of sort of keeping to the pulse of the people and making sure that they know that their comments are being heard. That's perhaps like the most important tool that we have currently. I was surprised how much I like it when we started yet another tool, but it was, I think it's a really good thing. We also report those dashboards to everybody all the time. So it's sort of a thing. But of course, then it also comes in our industry, it also comes to the sort of way of organizing, whether it's sort of low hierarchy or do you have a lot of layers so that you need to sort of get your voice heard. But that said, we are sort of a low hierarchy company, but anyway, we do believe still in the team leads and in having a person-to-person approach. So we are not trying to get rid of people. We are trying to build good leadership and good management in the company, even though it's full of autonomous workers.
I have one more tip. I think that it's one thing internal comms can do to support this is just to seek out the stories where somebody did speak up and it made a difference in the company, and to really recognize people who are speaking up. That's obviously not appropriate in every type of feedback, but it's out there, and that's how you start. That's how you create innovation, when people feel comfortable sharing their ideas, improving their work, improving the work of their team. So I think there's an opportunity to really recognize people who are sharing their voice and make that the norm and make that a good thing in our content and in our channels.
I also think it's
very
sorry, Minna.
No, I just want to say that's a very interesting decision solution. I've never heard about it, but it sounds like something that would actually work here.
I was just going to say it's also important to understand why they're worried about speaking up. You can have all the great tools and processes in place, but often if people are worried or not speaking up, it's because there's something there and something's happened. Either the responses haven't been, they've spoken up before and they've been ignored, or they're scared to speak up because they've heard rumours that if they speak up, this is what happened. So I always find it's quite interesting and useful to try and understand why people are not using the channels that you have got in place and why they are not willing to feedback. Because often there'll be a barrier or a blocker or something that's happened in the past. And with internal comms, we do have to-do lists as long as our arm, and sometimes things can be missed. And if people think that they're being ignored and not being listened to or heard, then often they step back and are not willing to contribute again. So it's also important to uncover why they don't speak up.
And in our company, we use really a lot of Slack. so that's sort of the lowers the threshold of saying what you are thinking about. And we hold, for example, sometimes ask me anything sessions and stuff like that. So in case we have like people who are responsible for some certain area, you can ask them anything. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So now we'll need to move forward. We have 15 minutes left and still 2 statements. And Suzanne thanks you in a comment. So I guess your answers were useful. Statement number 5 reads, IC's greatest competitor is social media. Stephanie, what would you say about it? Do you agree or disagree?
I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. And there's 2 reasons. The first is about experience. Some people call it employee experience. I would argue for internal comms, it's more about information experience. So you think about, going on Facebook when you're able to get on, not yesterday, obviously, and what kind of content that you and how personal it is. And it comes right to you. You sit down to watch Netflix. It says, do you want to watch the next episode of XYZ? And you're like, yes, that's literally why I sat down. And, we have to compete with that kind of convenience. If somebody says, okay, I want to change my contributions for parking, and they have to reset their password 3 times, visit an intranet page, visit a separate thing, then call a number, we're sort of, we're competing with this hyper personalized, easy user experience. And I think a lot of companies are starting to focus on that more now, but it's really a competition. We're competing with that, right? And then the second thing is just the type of content that is out there, and I've seen some brilliant and fun internal comms that is really interactive and short and fun content, but that's what we're used to, and our attention spans are shorter. You think about the last thing that you saw that blew your mind, that went viral, like, was it sent to you as a PDF attachment? Probably not. And maybe the goal of what we're doing is not to go viral, but we are still competing with the attention, of people. And I think that we have to start really getting creative and giving content and, experience to our employees that they're used to outside of work. So I would agree. It might not be the greatest competitor, but it's definitely a competitor for our employees.
Yeah, it's like, I feel like, at least in my marketing function, it's crazy war for attention. Attention span is so short nowadays. If you don't get attention in the first line, it's done. And the same for IC, actually. It's an interesting angle. I didn't think about that way, but for sure, you guys are competing against marketers in their social media, and it's not easy.
And if I can recommend a book I read this summer, I read The Attention Merchants by Tim Wu. It's the epic scramble to get in your head, or something like that. And it outlines the history of all these people who are trying to harness attention, and things got shorter, things got more personal, things got more interactive, and we have to move that way as an industry to really motivate people, I think. So
thank you. Minna, what do you think? Do you agree or disagree?
I disagree. I would say that social media is not the competitor for internal comms, but it's sort of another channel for us also. And one way it can fortify or strengthen the way that we have told our story, and then you see it again in social media, or it can help people to, for example, feel more personal with their leaders if they read stuff. And I really encourage sort of my leadership team and all to participate. And I think it's great to hear their views, and not only the informative stuff, but also the personal stuff, because it helps people to relate to you, and that builds trust. And that's what we are about. And basically, we are building that trust for the company to survive when it's tougher times. And otherwise, we'll just enjoy it. But then when we really need it, we'll have it.
Thank you. Advita, can you hear us?
I can, yes. I think it is, I do disagree actually with this statement. I agree with Minna that, it should be used as a channel in organisations where possible. But I actually think IC's greatest competitor are other people, other colleagues in the business. And, you know, we talk about gossip and information and misinformation, and I heard this from this person and I heard that from that person and this is what they said. I think they're our biggest competitors, other colleagues in the business. And because of Stephanie's point is that, you know, sometimes we don't work at the pace we need to work due to hundreds of different ways of signing off stuff. You know, any internal communicator and communicator will know to sign off a piece of work, you may need to go through 3 or 4 different people before you get agreement on this is what you're going to say. But by that point, the gossip chambers and the conversations already gone across the business.
Yes, exactly.
And it's really hard to bring that back. So, you know, I do think we need to work at pace at times, and we need to be in agreement that from some of our leaders in what is okay to kind of go out, and it's okay to make, you know, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. And I think we sometimes fall down this perfectionist route and forget about the pace of the information we need to get out, because we're so busy trying to just get it 100% spot on. And sometimes it just has to be good enough to go, to avoid the kind of gossip. Because in my experience, and I'm sure it's the same in Steffi and Minna and other people listening, it's so hard to bring back that kind of rumor that's gone out there and to reassure people that this isn't what it's meant to be, and this is what we need you to read and pay attention to. So I do think the greatest competitor for IC are other colleagues in the business and the way they communicate with each other.
Yeah, I like to say that it's ready to be communicated when it's not ready. And if it's completely ready and perfect, you're probably late.
Yes.
I'd like to ask a follow-up question to that, Advita. So I agree that colleagues are also, you know, the gossip mill, but I'd wonder, you know, what channels are those people using to communicate with each other? You know, are those social channels, right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, WhatsApp, you know, those kind of channels, I do think that they do play a part, definitely. You know, how many times have we tried to, in my experience, a number of times we tried to discourage people from using those informal channels to communicate, which are text messaging and WhatsApp, but yet that is one of the main methods of communication between teams and peers in businesses. And I worked for an organization who didn't have the right platform in place to communicate with colleagues, so colleagues created their own website with a secret chat channel that no one could access. You know, and that's when you know things are a bit broken, when colleagues have to go and create. And so as well as dealing with the unions, I had to deal with this staff forum network, which had something like 7,500 colleagues using this informal channel to find out information that nobody from comms or HR or anyone could access because it wouldn't allow them in. And that's, you know, this is what I mean when I say people are creating their own communities and using, you know, to Stephanie's point, they are using social channels and they are using WhatsApp and text messaging to get messages out as quickly as can, especially as somebody's point in the chat there was non-wired employees. So those employees who don't have access to work laptops and work mobile phones and don't see their leaders on a day-to-day or regular basis, they will find that information the most convenient way, which often happens to be through their peers and people that they trust in the business as well. Rightly or wrongly, you know, whether the information is right or not, they will trust that person.
Yeah, there was, as you mentioned, a comment from Leslie that we should always remember there are a bunch of non-wired employees, both in work and out of work. And that also made me think about the WhatsApp, and that there has been a study that, I don't know, 70% of non-desk workers are using WhatsApp without their managers knowing, as one of the main channels. So if you think about it, it's like mind-blowing. It's not an official channel. The company has zero control of what is happening there. It's not the kind of channel that they're supposed to use, but unfortunately that's what's happening. So that's a huge task for IC to facilitate where the communication happens and the HR, I guess, and how does it happen. But thank you. Let's move to our last statement. As IC practitioners, our role is to guide and advise. If leaders don't want to listen, that's not our problem. That's a very strong statement. Advita, what do you think about it?
I kind of agree with this a little bit. I do think that, you know, and this is because I've spoken to so many internal communicators who have been burnt out or trying to change perceptions of senior leaders over and over again, and they're not listening. And I do think sometimes our role, all we can do, in all honesty, is to show the data, guide, advise, try and influence and persuade. And if they don't want to take that feedback on board, then we just have to wait and see what happens. And hopefully, you are proven right without you having to say, I told you so. They will recognize that actually they should trust your judgment and feedback. I think not being able to sleep at night and not being able to kind of work and focusing too much energy on trying to persuade people, even though you've presented the evidence and the data and the insight and the information, and you've guided them and advised them, there is an element of, right, well, I've given you everything that you need. As a leader in this organization who is getting paid to make decisions, it's up to you to make this decision based on the information I've given you. I don't think we could go any further with that. We just have to allow our leadership team to make that decision. But we have to give them and present the right data and insight for them to make a valid choice or a right choice, I should say. And I think that's as far as we can go in our role as internal communicators.
Yeah. Minna, what do you think about that?
Well, I would tend to disagree. It's definitely going to be our problem if they don't listen. But I'm an eternal optimist, so of course I believe that we are going to make the difference then. And I would say that, I really feel that internal communications people need to be on the same side with the management. Sometimes I hear people pitching behind somebody's back that, we should do this and that, and our management team or somebody is disagreeing. And I really think that we need to then look in the mirror and ask ourselves, did we plan it well enough? Do they have enough time? Is this relevant for the company's situation currently? Have we inspired and motivated them with the possibilities that we have in this case, so that we can sort of probably make them see the light when we present it better? But of course, I understand that sometimes there are also situations that we don't know everything. I mean, for example, mergers and acquisitions and stuff like that might be coming up or something is happening that you are not even aware, and which affects the decisions of the top management. So that might be one thing, but I think together we will be stronger.
Minna's application for the governance. Stephanie, what about you?
I'm on the fence with this. I think I'm more on the side of agree. And I would, again, rephrase this statement and say, as practitioners, our role is to guide and advise. And if leaders don't want to listen, then we keep fighting the good fight. And I think I think it's a journey. And of course, I think Minna made a great point that we don't know everything. It's not only an employee audience. We may be experts on that, but there's government, there's the investors, there's all these other audiences that are equally as important, and you kind of have to balance all of those interests. But I do think over time, when we think about this statement, and Advita mentioned it too, I think we can, this is where we use our metrics. And I don't mean number of emails sent or how many people clicked, but how are we measuring an outcome? And then, whether or not you were able to persuade a leader to do something one way or the other, you can come back and say, okay, well, did we achieve our goal, and have some way to measure that. And then over time, you'll develop that collaboration that will get everybody on the same page and achieve what we're actually trying to achieve, which is not good internal comms, but is, the strategy for the company, activating our employees, helping them, contribute to what the company's goals and the mission. So yeah, I think if they don't want to listen, we keep fighting the good fight and having conversations.
Yeah, I guess as with everything at work, it's a relationship building project. So it takes time, but with time, like in Minna's case, COVID kind of helped to get more FaceTime at some point, so that you ended up having daily meetings with civil.
We used to have a saying in one of the organizations I worked in, and you may have lost this battle, but you'll win the war. And that's what we had to kind of keep saying to ourselves if things didn't get signed off. So, right, we might have lost that battle, but we will win the war. And that was our kind of mission statement of the comms team, because it can be disheartening, right, when things don't get agreed and leaders do disagree with you. So you do have to keep, as Stephanie's point, keep your eye at the end of what you're trying to achieve and the purpose of the comms in that business.
Yes. That's a nice way to finalize with words of wisdom. Advita already said one quotable phrase about not being a battle, but being a war. But actually, as we are approaching the end of the debate, I would like to thank you for participating. But before you go, I would like to ask you to share some words of wisdom. And on the screen, our audience can see your contact information. So feel free to get in touch with our speakers. And of course with SMART. But before we go, Advita, could you kindly share something the audience should take away from this great comms debate?
I would say there's so much going on, and sometimes as internal communicators we can forget to look after ourselves in all of the kind of noise and information that's out there at the moment. So my number one top tip to anyone who's listening is make sure you take some time out for yourself and get that reflection time and think back and do your lessons learned and then move forward, because we can get so caught up in the trudgery of everyday life that we can often forget to look after who we are and what we're about. And we need to be kind of, focused and on point when we're kind of advising and guiding our organisation and leaders in there. So we do have to put ourselves first sometimes, and we can often forget to do that.
Thank you. Stephanie, what would you like to say?
That's really hard to follow. I agree with that 100%. But I think what I learned from this discussion is, there's not one way to do these things. To provide support and to get, to have internal comms support an organization. And so I think it's just important to keep an open mind and try new things within guardrails, with support, with guidelines, right? And always have a way to measure the outcomes, and that's how we're going to grow and learn. And it's a journey, as we said before.
That was great. That was a great way to follow Advita. You didn't have to do it for it.
I don't know.
Minna, what would you like to say?
Yeah, perhaps I'd say that don't be afraid to listen to your audiences. I think we all know the fact that, like Advita pointed out, we have a task list of the length of our arm, but in that prioritization, you will need your audience's voices to understand what actually is driving both the management, but also the people that you are talking to and with. So in order to get them motivated, you will need to understand their motivating factor. So perhaps not be afraid of that discussion, even though there will be voices that are not agreeing with you.
There always are. Okay, with that, I would like to thank our wonderful speakers and all the people in the audience. It was lovely to see that so many of you stayed throughout the whole debate. It was 1 hour of discussion, and I'm happy to see that most of the people who joined stayed, so you were engaged. Thank you for all the questions in the chat and all the comments. And we'll see you next time. Please stay tuned for the next webinar from SMART, and please get in touch if you would like to talk to us about the platform. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.